All right. Hey, good morning, Carolina Beach. And I think we are live on Facebook once again for my weekly Saturday morning broadcast. I've been broadcasting every Saturday morning throughout the election season. And you know what? The election season is almost over. It's been a long season, and we only have about a little more than a week left in the election season. So every week when I broadcast, I try to go to somewhere different on the island, somewhere interesting or fun. But today I'm at home broadcasting from my home office because I put together a very special presentation for you for this week's live broadcast. The presentation is going to go over most of the big issues, high priority issues that have been discussed and that I've been talking about throughout the campaign season. So I'm going to go over what I see is the problems that are going on, and then show you some of the proposals I have for addressing these issues. So that's my plan, and so let's just get started. And I think this presentation we can get through it in about 20 or 30 minutes. So that's the plan. All right, and thanks for joining me. And so sit back, get your coffee ready, and happy Halloween, and enjoy the show. All right. So again, it's been a long election season, but there's not everyone. I haven't met everyone yet, and so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tom Elicson, and I am running to be the next mayor of Carolina Beach. And I'm doing that because I do sincerely believe that we need a change in leadership, and I believe I have the right experience and background to make a difference. So I have big plans to improve things, make some changes, and to be your next mayor. But I also realize that none of that will be possible. None of that can happen without your support and without your vote. So today I am also, as this election season is drawing to a close, I'm asking for your vote. I need you to vote for me on November 5th to be mayor, your next mayor. And I'm also here throughout all of these Facebook Live broadcasts, and especially this one today that lays out my plan. I'm also here to convince you that I'm the best candidate to be your next mayor. All right, and so I do say that I have the right background and experience to be your next mayor. So I want to start off this presentation by going over my background, giving you a little bit more information about me. So I did come to Carolina Beach by way of Hudson, Ohio, and we've been living here for about 7.5 years. My wife and my daughter, who's a junior at Ashley High School. We have a house here on near Texas and Bowfin. But while I was in Ohio, I did serve on a town council, and during that time I worked very hard on stormwater and flooding issues. And we had a lot of stormwater, a lot of flooding, a lot of infrastructure issues. So I focused on that, and I did learn. I was able to see firsthand when infrastructure couldn't keep up, how families could suffer from the failing infrastructure. So that's very important to me. I also, learned during that time what it takes for a publicly elected official to provide proper oversight for these large public projects to make sure they get done properly the first time. And so even though it's the town's responsibility to provide the day-to-day management and supervision of these projects, the elected officials, the council and the mayor, they have to provide oversight. They have to give support and provide oversight, and there's a proper way to do that, and it has to be done. But one of my favorite things about being on council was not sitting in all the meetings, which can be pretty boring, but it was getting out in the community and meeting with the people, getting my feet and my hands dirty, and learning about the issues firsthand. So I think that's also very important. And one of the big projects I worked on in Ohio, which I like to bring up, is there was the longest residential road in Hudson, Ohio, Atterbury Boulevard, had maybe close to 100 residential homes on it. It was also sat relatively low in the town, and so every time it rained, it would flood. And this flooding was pervasive. It went on for years and years, and the residents always complained. And in my first year in office, I walked down that road constantly talking to the residents. Whenever there was heavy downpours, they'd call me on the phone, and I'd go out and meet them. We'd talk. And the prior solution for these residents and their flooding every time that it would rain, their yards would flood. The sewage would back up into their houses, so the city just simply put in backflow prevention valves. It kept the sewage from coming in, but during those heavy rains, they couldn't flush the toilet. They couldn't do any laundry. They couldn't do any washing of any kind because of the backflow prevention valves were closed. So that was a narrow road. It was an old, dilapidated road, no proper drainage. It sat low, it flooded, no curbs. But I worked with those residents. We had town hall meetings. I took pictures. I made presentations to council. And in my second year, we got in the budget funding for a complete soup to nuts reconstruction of Atterbury Boulevard. And that project went through successfully. They were able to widen the road, put in curbs, put in proper drainage. They put in a lift pump, a lift station to get the water out of there. They put in great sidewalks and landscaping and lighting. So it went from being one of the worst roads to one of the best roads in town. So I just bring this up for two reasons. One is to show that I know how to solve problems. I know how to work with people and get things done. I think that's very important. But also, I bring this up to demonstrate that things that have been a problem for a very long time, areas that have been problematic, it doesn't always have to be that way. Just because something's been a problem for a very long time doesn't mean that going forward it has to continue to be a problem. Long-standing problems can be solved. You need a dedicated mayor or member of council that's going to focus on that issue and make it a high priority. And I've done that before, and I will do that again as your next mayor of Carolina Beach. Let me see, professionally, I am an engineer. I have 30 years of experience as a nuclear engineer, and I do manage a number of large projects. And so again, on the private side, I understand the importance of providing oversight. I understand the importance of budgeting. I know how to get things done. I know how to make sure things get done right the first time, on a schedule and on a budget. So I think that's also very important. I think it's a very important background for our next mayor to have. We have a lot of large infrastructure projects we'll be seeing for the foreseeable future. So I think that's a good experience to have. I also like to stay involved in the community. I have served since coming to Carolina Beach. I served as co-chair of the Operations Advisory Committee. And during that time, I served as a lead author on that committee's stormwater and flooding report. As part of that work on the flooding report, I went out on a boat. I went up and down Myrtle Grove Sound, around Canal Drive and Florida Avenue. I performed an informal survey of the bulkheads, and I presented that information to the Operations Advisory Committee and to council. And at least in that survey, it demonstrated that some of the properties with older bulkheads that had lower top heights, you were susceptible to overtopping and flooding during high tide events. And so that's just pointing out one possible area of one possible source of flooding on the north end. But I do believe, as I've been studying these issues, that there are engineering solutions to the flooding on the north end. There's putting in these backflow prevention valves. There's addressing the bulkhead issue, but there are engineering solutions, and implementing those solutions to address these problems on the north end must continue to be a high priority. Currently, I'm president of the Megan Cahigas Education Foundation. It's a great charity whose mission is to help raise funds to help families and their children afford preschool tuition. So there's a lot of families in New Hanover County, these local families that are struggling, and we help them out. It's a great charity. I'm also a member of the Island Men organization. It's another great organization. It raises money for local issues and for other local charities. We raise money and we redistribute it to other charities that are helping to address local issues. So as your next mayor, and what I've been talking about during this campaign season are my priorities, and I've broken these priorities down into three groups. The infrastructure, we have a lot of infrastructure projects, town finances, which are always a hot topic, and then just managing growth. There's been a lot of talk this year about about the growth in the town and what are we going to do about it. And we have a draft land use plan coming out, or the draft plan is out, right? We want to get it finalized. So these are the big priorities that I see and the things that I will address as your next mayor. So I'll go over these briefly, and starting with infrastructure. I like to point out the lake dredging project just as an example of things that have gone wrong in the past, and I'm concerned that we haven't learned from our past mistakes. You know, on the engineering side, in the private world, we do projects and mistakes happen. That's fine, but we have a formal process where we implement corrective actions, and these corrective actions. The point of the corrective actions is to change our processes and procedures to make sure that the mistakes that happened in the past won't be repeated. And so, but I don't see that happening in the town of Carolina Beach. And so that's what I'd like to bring. I'd like to bring in, as mayor, this experience and work with the town manager to update the town's processes and procedures to implement some of these best practices that I'm familiar with for managing projects. And when I apply these best practices that I'm talking about, when I apply them to the lake dredging project, what I see is that many of the problems that we had there were avoidable and could have been avoided. And just two quick examples. One thing we do as a best practice is we have a pre-job brief. And during that pre-job brief, we always go over the very detailed schedule. The detailed schedule is it's just not a piece of paper with a few bullet points on it about when we would like to start and finish things. It's a line by line, a week by week schedule. Each line of the schedule has someone's name assigned to it, so there's accountability. And each line on the schedule has a start date and an end date. And it's important to end on time, but it's just as important that if specific task starts on time. And the other thing we do is we discuss the schedule, and everyone who's responsible for an item on the schedule gets asked if they're okay and if they can make that schedule. But we also ask about project risks. You know, what can possibly come up that might adversely impact your ability to meet the schedule. And so that's discussed. And so that's the first thing that I see that happened here on the lake dredging project. There was a contract award on January 10th. And the dredging was scheduled to start on March 27th. But on that particular date, there was no dredging. So basically the first major task of this lake dredging project, the first start date of the first major task was missed. But this is something that would have been discussed and should have been discussed during a pre-job brief. You know, can you make this March 27th start date? And as it turned out, the dredging equipment was out for maintenance. And so the dredging could not begin. And that should have also come up during a pre-job brief. Are there some project risks, something that might cause you to miss that start date? And the contractor could have said, well, we have equipment that we need to use is being used on another project. And if that project runs late, then that equipment will come offline late, and any maintenance that will have to occur will be late, and so that could affect our start date. So that's just an example, you know, what a pre-job brief can do for you. Look at the schedule, look at project risks. You know, other things, you know, we need to have, I know what we do on our private side is we have weekly status meetings where we go over the schedule. And we have a 2-week look ahead, you know, what new tasks are scheduled to start in the upcoming weeks. Are there any issues or concerns with those projects, with those tasks being started? You know, what tasks were supposed to have been completed during the past week, and did those get completed on time, or are there any complications? And I think, you know, as this project went along, the lake dredging, it didn't start when it was supposed to, and then every month after that, they fell farther and farther behind because of complications that cropped up. But these things would be discussed during weekly status meetings, and so any problems can be addressed proactively, and so you can minimize the impact on the schedule. And the final problem that happened was as they pulled the spoils out of the lake, there was a particular location where the spoils were supposed to be placed on the Army land at the Matsu property. And as it turned out, the material was put in a different location than was agreed upon, and finally the Army had enough of it, and they called a stop work. And so this is another big part of a best practice that we do in the nuclear industry that I'm familiar with. We have large projects, especially when there's large movements or anything going on a plant site. We have as part of the pre-job brief, we do a pre-job walk down. You put your boots on the ground and you physically go out there. So in this instance, we should have gone out to this Matsu property with the contractor, right? Who's ever the project manager there, our own town manager, or at least the mayor and a representative from council, they're stakeholders as well, and of course the colonel from the Army who's overseeing this project. As part of that walk down, you go to the Matsu land, you walk it down, and you point out very specifically, where the spoils are supposed to be going. Where was the agreement? What's the agreement? Walk everything down, make sure everything's okay. And so I think if that was done, it's very likely that we could have avoided this very largest problem that caused the lake dredging project to come to a halt. So that's what I'd like to do as your next mayor. There are other things as well, project management, best practices. It's the town's job to manage these practices, these projects, but I think council and the mayor need to provide guidance and need to provide support, and I think this is one large area where I would be able to help out as your next mayor, sharing my experience with the town to make sure they have the right processes and procedures in place to succeed. Let's go on to finances. So we operate on a fiscal year that goes from July 1st to June 30th. And so during the spring, the council works with the town manager to put a budget together and get it published in June. And it is the responsibility of the town manager to put all the numbers together and to build the budget. But council also has a responsibility. They have to provide oversight after the budget's approved, and they have to approve the budget in the first place. So they have to pay attention to what's going on during these spring workshops. But what I've seen, I've been following the budgets for a long time in Carolina Beach, and what I've seen is that our spending has been going up much faster than our revenue growth. But the interesting thing is, when you put a budget together in North Carolina, the state law says that your budgeted spending has to match your projected revenue when you publish a budget. And I look back at our budgets, and we do a very good job of projecting our revenue in this town. And so when the budget is published, sure enough, all our spending matches the revenue. But when you get to the end of the year, what we see is that the spending has actually gone, this spending is actually far in excess of the revenue. And so I ask, why does that happen? And it brings up two questions. Not only why is it happening, but when we have spending in excess of revenue, where's that extra money come from? Well, first of all, the extra money comes from our reserve fund. So this is our general fund reserve balance. During that same time period, back in 2014, our reserve fund was nearly 70% of our budgeted spending. And over the course of time, it decreased to as low as 21%. And that's when the North Carolina State Treasurer's Office wrote a letter of concern to our town manager. They were specifically concerned that our fund balance might have been too low to provide the necessary resources that our town needed. And so I think what we need to do, and what I would be doing as your next mayor, is I will work with the council and the town to implement some best practices for money management. And and there are several key parts of that. And number one is, the most fundamental thing is that all costs that we reasonably expect to incur during the year should appear in the budget. Now, that sounds pretty fundamental, but when I see our budgets come out and then I see the end of the year spending much higher than what was budgeted, I have to ask that if we really included in the budget everything that we expected to spend during the year. And including these expected expenses in the budget gets into this other point, is that we need to stop the unbudgeted spending. And the unbudgeted spending, sometimes emergencies and unexpected things actually do come up. Maybe our air conditioning system would go out at town hall, would need to be replaced. That's fine. Would be $50,000 or $100,000. But unless it's a true emergency or truly unexpected cost, we should not be drawing down the reserve fund. I mean, if it's important spending, then you can either plan for it or you can push it into next year's budget. That's what should be going on. But just as an example, you know, we've been talking a lot about the Clarendon Avenue multi-use path, and we applied for grant money for that path back in December and January. And back in January, a resolution was approved to pursue a grant for that project. And that there was a post-application meeting that the town had with the state, and the feedback was that it was very likely that we would receive that grant and would be approved. But the grant is only an 80-20, they only give us 80%, and we have to the town has to come up with the other 20%. And so the town's portion of that match would be about $136,000, and the grant would be around $546,000 to do this work. But in my mind, we apply for many grants every year. We have a very well-respected and competent grant writer on staff in the town. He does a great job at writing grants, and he's very successful at getting these grants. So we write a number of grants every year, and we know that a certain amount of these grants will be awarded. But whenever the grant comes in, there's a cost that goes along with it. And in my opinion, the sharing portion, our portion of the cost that from these grants that we apply for should show up as line items in the budget. And again, with the Clarendon Avenue multi-use path, you know, there was a recent workshop to discuss the legislation or discuss the project. And one of the council members was concerned. He was saying that, you know, if we get this grant, if this grant comes in, how are we going to cover the other 20%, our matching portion? He goes, it hasn't been budgeted, so it's going to be unbudgeted spending. So it'll either be unbudgeted spending or we have to finance it. Well, that's the whole point I'm trying to make. We were pretty certain we're going to get this grant. That needs to be a line item in the budget. So that's a cost that was reasonably expected to be incurred. It needs to show up in the budget so we don't have an impact on our reserve fund. But we have also applied for a number of other grants this year, and if those grants come in, you know, our matching portion is not showing up in the budget, and so I think that's something we can address, at least to have a portion of all the grants that we apply for. We don't get 100% of them, but we have a good track record. We know what our win rate is, so we should have a line item in the budget to cover the matching portion of the grants that we apply for. Another big, I think the most fundamental thing that we need to do that we don't, is that we need to have a running total of the spending and revenue for the fiscal year to date. And that needs to be presented at every monthly meeting. And that is not currently being done. And that's pretty fundamental. If you serve on a charity board, I serve on a charity board, I work with another charitable organization, and you always have your treasurer's reports at every meeting, and they tell you, this is how much revenue we've had year to date, this is what our spending is. And on Council in Ohio, we had a monthly report from the budget director. It was called the run rate, the running total of expenses and revenue. But again, that's not done here, and this especially comes up. We've been talking about, there's been a big issue with Freeman Park and the erosion that's taken place. That's Mother Nature at work. But we project in our budget to have about $1.9 million in revenue from Freeman Park. But that revenue could be way down. But we don't know. I mean, as a matter of fact, at a recent workshop, again, a council member was saying that he would like to see the budget director provide us a month-over-month, the month-over-month revenue that we're getting from Freeman Park. So that's great. That's what the information council should be getting. I believe that's information they should already have and that they would get if they had this monthly run rate. So, especially with the Freeman Park, we also need to match all these large revenue sources with an expense. So with the Freeman Park funding, what is that money being used for? And this is very important, because if all of a sudden, if this revenue source decreases significantly, we need to know what programs would be impacted. And you can see that on the private business side, right? If you have a product line that suddenly the sales go way down and you're not getting the revenue you expect, if you're having a running total year-to-date of revenue, you'll know early in the year or halfway through the year that one of your major revenue sources is not going to make its goal. So you can be proactive and adjust the budget and adjust spending and make cuts, so that when you get to the end of the year, you don't have a huge budget shortfall. So it's very important to, I think it's very important to match revenue sources to expenses, and it's very critical to have a monthly report of running total of expenses and revenues. All right, we're running out of time here, so I got to pick up the pace. I don't think we're going to get through everything. What else can we talk about? Managing growth. And this statement here really sums up my whole view of growth and development. Life is all about change, and we'll be constantly changing, and this town will be constantly growing. But we can't forget, as we grow, we can't forget about why we all live here. What attracted us here in the first place, has to be a higher priority as we grow. I think a lot of us, we enjoy our coastal views. We enjoy our quiet residential neighborhoods, and those need to be protected. Coastal views need to be protected, and our residential neighborhoods need to be protected. And so that's when I talk about managing growth. That's what we need to do. We need to keep the focus on protecting the things that we like, and things that we like about the town, and the reasons that we moved here. And so with growth, there's several areas that I think need to be addressed when it comes to growth. There's parking, there's commercial development, the issue of short-term rentals has been big this year, pedestrian safety, and this room occupancy tax. But just with parking, I think we simply just do not have enough town-owned parking places. And so what I've been seeing going on in the past year or so is we've been limiting our parking time in the central business district to 2 hours. We've been increasing parking fees. We've been more aggressive. The town has been more aggressive about enforcement. And we've painted tiny white boxes that no locals, trucks and SUVs and Jeeps can possibly fit into in the central business district. So all these measures are not addressing the fundamental issue that we don't have enough parking spaces. All they're doing is annoying the locals, in my opinion. So what I have proposed, and what I would like to see is that when I go back to the very beginning of this campaign season, I had a public radio interview on WHQR, and I proposed that as your next mayor that I would form an ad hoc committee to look for parking solutions. And ad hoc committees, they do work very well, especially in this town. They work best when they have a well-defined deadline and a well-defined objective. So what my proposal that I presented was that we would put in a tight timeline of maybe 120 days for this ad hoc parking committee to come up with 3 specific proposals to meet our parking needs going out for the next 10 years. I would like that committee to come back after their first 30 days to the council with projections, with the parking projections. What are our parking needs for the next 10 years? And once we have a target, once that target's established, then the committee can look for solutions. And the solutions they need to come back with should be very specific. And then that's we can take these proposed solutions. That'd be a starting point for discussion with council and with the town about how to address parking. But right now, this past summer, we could find parking, but it was marginal. And if it wasn't for all these private lots, I don't think we would have been able to keep up with our parking needs. And the private lots can go away overnight due to development, right? And here's a summary of all the town paid parking spaces. There's about 1,000 of them in total. But these hamlet lots in front of the Marriott, that's land that's owned by the Marriott, and they're letting us use. But the Marriott now wants to develop those properties. So if we lose these 2 hamlet lots, that's nearly 100 parking spaces. That's about 10% of our total public parking. That's going to cause a big problem. But we have a chance on this one issue. We can be proactive. We're not at a crisis yet, but you can see that we'd be getting there. So I would like to be proactive and come up with solutions before things get to a crisis point. Let me see. So with commercial development, I know right now we can walk through the main business district. We can walk through many parts of town. We don't have to be on the beach, but we can catch the ocean breeze. You know, we see the sun shining over the dunes. We hear the sounds of the surf. These are our coastal views, and these coastal views are very important to our quality of life. Everyone loves the beach. That's a big reason we're here. We love the beach. We love our coastal views. So we need to make sure that any development that takes place will not adversely impact our coastal views. I've been to a lot of resort towns, you know, larger scale, but they have all these large scale and high-rise development along the main road, and you can essentially get walled off from the beach, and you can lose your coastal view completely. And so I think that's something we need to be very careful about. The way we can control and manage growth is through our land use plan and our zoning ordinances. And so we just have to make sure that those are in alignment with our desires for growth and our desires to preserve our enjoyment of the coastal aesthetics, as I say. But the land use plan, there's a draft land use plan out there. It's proposing changes to some of the existing land use. And some of those proposed changes affect our quiet residential neighborhoods. On this map behind the Pelican Watch on Beaufort Lane back to Snapper, these dark brown areas are currently low and medium density housing. That's what the current zoning shows them as. I've walked these areas down. They're all single and two-family homes. But these dark areas indicate that the land use plan would like to reclassify those as high-density housing areas. And so I'm asking myself, why are they doing that? They're already established. It's a quiet residential neighborhood. It's close to the Lake Park Boulevard, but especially in the off-season, it's pretty quiet. And I live on one of these. I live at Texas in Beaufort, and so I know about this. It's a quiet area with a lot of single-family homes. But there are, in both of these areas, there are a number of vacant lots that can still be developed. And if you reclass these areas to high-density housing, then that will open the door for condominium and apartment construction in these quiet residential neighborhoods. And so I think that's something we should not allow. And so it's very important, even though this land use plan is not a zoning document, it's used when changes to the zoning rules are made. And so it opens the door, changes to the land use plan open the door to changes in zoning. So it's very important that we make sure the land use plan is aligned with our desires to protect the downtown and to protect our neighborhoods. All right, let's keep moving on here. Short-term rentals, we've talked a lot about that. And in the land use plan, it reports that, you know, in the busy season, we can have 10,000 overnight visitors. But the interesting thing is that maybe what a lot of people don't realize is that only about 2,000 of those overnight visitors, 2,000 stay in the full-service hotels and motels. And the majority of the rest, about 3 times as many, stay in short-term rentals. That's huge. So we do have a lot of people visiting the beach with short-term rentals. That's kind of a mainstay of any beach community, and it is an important part of our economy. But the other thing to realize is that what's reported in the land use plan is that when 8 of the 9 top beach communities in North Carolina, the seasonal housing in 8 of those 9 communities makes up more than half of all the housing in those communities. But Carolina Beach is the one exception. We have a much lower percentage of housing that is seasonal. We're down about 38%. And you know, you recognize that because when you come here, this beach community is different than the other ones. We have a high number of residential neighborhoods, quiet neighborhoods, and that's a major attraction, and we need to protect that. But we have to also recognize that these short-term rentals are vital to Carolina Beach. So we can't regulate them out of existence. There just needs to be some balance between maintaining the residential neighborhoods and allowing the short-term rentals. And one of my prior Facebook Live broadcasts talked about this in more detail, so you can go back and listen to that about my ideas about the short-term rentals. With pedestrian safety, we have a bicycle multi-use plan, but it was last updated in 2011, and I think it needs to be revisited and updated. And I also think that the priority of the projects on that list need to be revisited. And because I do see high priority projects for these multi-use paths that are actually going through quiet residential neighborhoods. And let me see here. Right, so as an example here, these pink lines represent proposed multi-use paths similar in scope to what's on Cape Fear Boulevard. But when you look here on Tennessee Avenue and Bonito Lane, these are very quiet residential neighborhoods. They certainly don't need a large multi-use path going through there. But yet these show up on the list as high priority projects. So I think we should, and you have Ocean Boulevard as well, but it's down about number 20 on the project. Where's Ocean Boulevard? Here's the list of all the projects in the 2011 plan. And we have Ocean Boulevard as number 21. But Ocean Boulevard gets a lot of pedestrian traffic, and it has a lot of automobile traffic. And so I believe that our main arteries, where there's a lot of high-speed traffic and a high pedestrian use, that those projects should be a higher priority on the list. So I think we can update this plan and revisit it and adjust the priorities. But I do think we should follow through and implement the projects as well. So it's a very good plan. Let's see what else we got here. We can talk just about the room occupancy tax. This will be the last thing. In Carolina Beach, from the short-term rentals and from the hotels and motels, Carolina Beach generated $2.8 million in revenue. But that revenue goes to the county, and they divide it up into 4 parts. And 2 parts the county takes for direct advertising. That amounted to $1.25 million. Another part goes to a sand fund, which is nice, but it's interesting that they spend more money on advertising than they do on the actual sand fund. If we don't have a beach, it doesn't matter how much you spend on advertising, no one would ever come here. And then the 4th part is a small portion, about 25% of the total, that comes directly to Carolina Beach. And in our budget this year, it's showing $700,000. But even to use that money, it can only be used for tourist-related activities. So we still have to go back to the county to get their permission before we can spend this $700,000. But this room occupancy tax, the ROT, is subject to state and county laws that dictate the way the funds are distributed. And I think it needs to be reworked. It's not a very equitable funding plan. That should be reworked. And that's something we should work on. And as your mayor, that's something I will be a priority and I will work on. But the bottom line is that tourism is growing. And here's a chart that shows the county-wide, New Hanover County-wide growth in the room occupancy tax. And since 2014, we've had about 65% growth in the tax. And that's a good measure of how much tourism in this area has been growing. And so as the tourism increases, there's increased impacts in Carolina Beach from increased demands on infrastructure, increased demands on water usage. We want to have more higher quality, better drinking water. Well, this increased tourism is really stressing that water system. And so that's going to cost us more money to address. There's more increased demand on safety services and just infrastructure in general. So we're paying, but these increased costs, we currently cannot pay from the room occupancy tax, because paying for infrastructure, that's not viewed as a tourism related activity. So although the tourists, they impact our roads, so we should be able to pay for that. It's important to keep the town looking nice, right? But so instead of these increased costs we as the residents are shouldering the burden for those increased costs. And we're paying for those impact of the increase in tourism through our higher utility rates. So to address our infrastructure needs, we took out a $31 million revenue bond. And to pay for that bond over the last several years, we've had double-digit increases in our utility rates. But it would be nice if we we could rework the ROT funding formula to help us pay for some of these infrastructure improvements, which are critical to our town and critical to us to being able to continue to support growth in tourism. And, you know, in 2015, before we took out this $31 million bond, every year we would pay to service the debt in the utility fund. We'd pay about $1.5 million. But now that we have this new bond that we've taken out, you know, the amount that the town has to pay every year for principal and interest on this debt service is about $2.7 million. So we've gone up by about $1 million a year that we're paying additionally to cover this bond. But I think it would be nice that instead of the ROT spending $1.25 million on advertising and only letting us have $700,000, that if that could be reversed. Wouldn't that be nice if that could be reversed? It wouldn't cover a good chunk of this increased debt service in the utility fund. It wouldn't cover it all, but I think it could provide relief, especially for seniors on fixed incomes. So I think we need to really work on this funding formula for the room occupancy tax and make it more equitable so we can cover the impacts of increased tourism that's been taking place. And that increase in tourism will only continue to take place going forward. It will only continue to grow as we move forward. So it's a very important issue. All right, so that's it. I think that's everything I wanted to get to. It took me a little bit longer than a half hour. But I do believe that for this town to move forward, we need a change in leadership. I think we need some new ideas. We need some fresh thinking. And that's what I will provide. I do have the right experience and background. You know, I have experience with municipal and private budgets. I have experience with providing oversight on municipal and private projects. I think that's very important for us going forward. But I also realize that no change can happen without your vote. And so that's why I'm asking for your vote. But I want to leave you, as I'm asking for your vote, and I want you to vote to elect Tom Elicson for mayor on November 5th. I do want to leave you with one final thought about why it's so important for us to have a change. Because I pointed out to you there's a lot of long-standing problems. I've tried to point out to you some of the possible solutions we can have and how to address these problems. But you know, given my background in nuclear engineering, I would be remiss if I didn't at least give you one quote from the father of nuclear power, Albert Einstein. And his quote is what he says. He's a very smart guy. He says, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And so I say, you know, I say I agree with that. You know, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And so we need some new people in office, and we need some new leadership. And that's why I'm running for mayor of Carolina Beach. And I hope you agree with me, and I hope I can count on your support and count on your vote on November 5th. It's just barely a week away, so get out there and vote. And thanks for listening in this morning, and thanks for listening in every week on my Facebook Live broadcast. And if you missed this one, I'll try to repost it on Facebook coming up very shortly. So thank you. Get your coffee refilled and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. So long.